Hi there, and thank you for joining us for this panel, which is on decarbonizing the grid. I'm joined by Arthur Kacprzak, who's the CFO for Algonquin Power and Utilities, Andrée-Lise Méthot, who is the CEO of Cycle Capital Management, and Todd, who's the CFO for TransAlta. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. This is obviously a very current topic with all the conversations that are happening around climate, decarbonizing the grid. There must be, we presume, a huge financial opportunity and various challenges associated with that. So I suppose just to frame it for everyone who's less familiar with this, is this an opportunity from your point of view for your organizations? Is it a global opportunity? Is it an opportunity specific to Canada or to North America? Where do you see the big opportunities? And I realize it may be different depending on your organizations. Arthur, could you go first, maybe?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. So from our purposes, look, our business is primarily a North American business. We're positioned basically around 90% of our business is right now in the United States. We have obviously also operations in Canada, where we started, and some operations in Bermuda and Chile. But our main focus right now continues to be North America, and I would say probably primarily in the U.S. market. And I would say we're very encouraged in the where the U.S. is going and how it's positioning itself with respect to climate change. And with that, we find there's a lot of opportunities to unearth there. I mean, our business, we operate both on the regulated utilities. We own both electric, gas, and water utilities there. And we also operate, obviously, our renewable business there as well.
Got it. I mean, Todd, Arthur mentioned that the majority of their business is in North America, and specifically a high proportion in the US. I mean, when I think about grid decarbonization and I just look at the numbers, because of the high penetration of hydro in Canada, the grid is actually already mostly decarbonized if we compare this to the US. So Joe Biden's put in place this target to be 80% decarbonized by 2030 in the US. Canada's already at 85% decarbonized. So does that mean that if we're thinking about North America, most of the opportunity here is south of the border?
Yeah, I would agree with what you said. I mean, clearly, Quebec, BC, Manitoba have, fantastic hydro resources that they've been able to utilize. Other provinces, maybe not so fortunate in that resource base, and Alberta, of course, being one of them. And TransAlta has been building wind farms here since the early 2000s. But as you say, the opportunity set is relatively small, even in this market. And we've seen tremendous inflow of interest in and actual development of wind facilities. So we actually, we do have significant operations in the U.S. and do see a huge opportunity set down there. We've seen, again, it's really each state is unique, but many of the states are moving towards decarbonization as well, and see a lot of opportunity set around the country. We do see additional, we have operations down in Australia as well. The federal targets for reduction down there aren't as strong as, say, Canada or the U.S., but still opportunities with customers looking to decarbonize their own portfolios. And so really doing, above and beyond sort of what the government's mandating. But again, big opportunity set in the U.S. for sure, and active in all of those markets.
Got it. And Andrée-Lise, in your role, I suppose you're looking at a lot of new technologies. So maybe my question is wrongly framed when I'm talking about, what geographies are interesting. Maybe you do have a view on that, or is it new technological areas that are interesting? Where do you see the big opportunity here?
I would say in terms of technologies, we have a lot of possibility and opportunity around the world. I will say the real challenge, it's not the technology. The real challenge is the scale up of technology. We have amazing experience with the big corporate or big industrial who are totally key around the table. Just imagine, we start from the lab, we have an idea, we have a young entrepreneur with a young group, and they need to have a conversation with the CFO of TransAlta. It's a gap. And we need absolutely to help them to bring the right conversation around the table. And through this aspect, the scale-up aspect, we need 3 things. At the beginning of investment, we need to understand how much money we need to reach the real destination. And the real destination, it's an exit, a partnership with a big company, big sales for the startup. And in our experience, what we learned last 10 years, I think investors like us with a clear background in IP and in engineering, we can set the right table. But to make sure we scale up properly, we need to have big corporates around our funds and around our companies in our portfolio. And let me share one example. We are one of the investors in Enercam. We're taking waste and producing green molecules. We did very well on the startup phase. But at the right moment, Suncor became, and what they bring is 25 people in our plan in Edmonton, and changed totally. It was a super big game changer for the company. And now it's about execution. We are doing well because we bring this experience. The other problem we have, it's not the opportunity and the market, it's how much will cost to upscale properly. Because failures in the industrial world, it's a really high cost. And our role, it's manage and take the right route of upscale with the right people, with enough deep pocket around the table. And I think it's the principal challenge. In my point of view, technologies are hard there. We just need to have the right route for them.
It's an interesting. Oh, sorry. Were you gonna cut in?
I was gonna just maybe jump in on that same vein that maybe there's a lot of different for decarbonization, and I know we're talking about decarbonization of the grid, but I mean I think that there's we need to think almost broader when we think about decarbonization, right? And I mean as we kind of think of as our business, right? And maybe on that same theme, I mean, yes, I mean 55% of our regulated business is electricity, right? Electricity distribution. But I mean, if you look at the other parts of our business, such as the investments that have been made into gas distribution, right, or even water infrastructure, there's those themselves have tremendous opportunities that we are actually looking at, whether it be, for example, investments into RNG, where you're basically using agricultural or other biological type waste and being able to produce this renewable natural gas that you can basically inject into your distribution system, right? So that's a big opportunity, I believe, to decarbonize some of the existing gas infrastructure. On the water side, too, I mean, and maybe on the same vein of new investments. I mean, there's so much electricity that goes into doing something with water, right? That's there's I think a lot of opportunities to kind of take that and be able to green the processing of water, but by pairing it with renewables. And again, so there's a lot of a lot more we can do besides just call it decarbonizing the grid.
And I think you're totally right with the circular economy topic. And if I take just one example, in our company, we have a company who's producing biocoal. And with that, we take waste wood from Canada. And with this technology, we can provide to Japan something to replace coal. And they don't need to change any infrastructure. But they will bring them at the level of classic gas, natural gas, instead of coal in terms of CO2. And what is really interesting is to how we can recirculate properly waste, energy, decarbonization. And it's not just about the grid, it's about the whole system, because the oil and gas industry, we need absolutely these talent around the table, because if they know brown molecules, they know green molecules, and we need that for cosmetic, for many things in our life.
I think this is a really sort of interesting point we're getting here, because we frame this conversation on decarbonizing the grid as if the grid is a problem that needs to decarbonize, and you move on and move to the next thing, whereas in fact the grid is a vehicle for broader decarbonization. So you both decarbonize the grid, and the grid is a catalyst for other areas. And so that's very exciting, and there's lots of new things that can happen. But we did some back of the envelope calculations in our analysis. We say, for example, in the US, you'd need about $90 billion a year in investment in wind and solar for the country to hit the targets that the government is aspiring to, and we're at about slightly less than half that. So bringing Todd in, because I know that you look at generation a lot in your work, and that's something you're heavily focused on. We talk about these new exciting technologies, but there's a gap there as an opportunity there, but is there also a gap and an opportunity in financing what are relatively mature technologies as well?
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the key words here is transition, right? Like this is not going to happen overnight, and so we need to make sure. One of the challenges currently with renewable energies is the intermittency, and so we need to make sure that we're actually balancing the grids as we move forward. And again, it's not individual companies. That really does rely on the grid operators and the governments to think about how that transition occurs in a fashion and pace that makes sense across the board. And to your point, that does mean that companies who are firming up that renewable power, whether it's through gas generation or other hydro, peaking capacities, that we're able to actually finance those operations as we transition through to a more renewables business. But you're absolutely seeing the trend where, whether it's debt investors or even equity equity investors, that what used to be a 2-minute conversation about carbon, and I'm talking 3, 4, 5 years ago, is now probably 50% of the conversation that you're having with investors is about what is your carbon footprint, what is the transition plan, what does your corporate citizenship look like. Those are much, much larger conversations. But in TransAlta's case, with the like I said, we've been building wind farms for a while, but again, transitioning off of coal, moving to gas as a transition fuel for at least the next decade or so, as we ramp down some of the carbon sources and ramp up some of the renewables. And we just built our first battery facility. It's important that we can still maintain financing, and so I think the transition story that TransAlta's brought forward for investors resonates extremely well. And so really, we haven't actually been challenged, but certainly it is something to be aware of for maybe some of the people who are maybe not adopting that transition plan and that future-looking strategy. But definitely, TransAlta's had great access from the banks, great access from bond investors, and certainly on our project finance side, that's also been very, very positive.
It's a really interesting topic you've opened up there, and it's something that I wanted to ask about, actually. We look at oil and gas, certainly in the US, is not growing despite as much as it was pre-COVID, despite commodities prices being high enough to support that, because there's a lack of finance because of some of these concerns. We also saw the example of what happened with ExxonMobil. Their investors voted in new board members because they felt the company wasn't taking the issue of decarbonization seriously enough. And so this is something that we're seeing happening in oil and gas right now, is the world of finance is kind of imposing a sort of discipline, if you could call it that. Do you think that this is something that is sweeping the power sector as well and is going to influence grid decarbonization? Todd, from what you said, it sounds like the answer is yes. That is something that some of maybe the companies that are further behind yours are feeling the pain on. Would you agree with that? And Arthur and Andrée-Lise, I mean, is this trend in finance something that's affecting your organizations as well?
Maybe I'll just start there. Like one other thing I just wanted to add is that, when you're making investments, these are long-term investments. And certainly in the power industry, it's, you're looking at 20, 30 or even longer year projects, looking to get returns over long periods. And again, I'm not an oil and gas expert, but again, similarly, if you're making big investments, you want to make sure that the horizon is there, that you can actually recover the capital. And I think that's one of the challenges right now, is that, there's maybe a bit of unclarity if what you build now will actually survive for 10 years, never mind 20 years. And so I think there is a lot of caution from the corporate side as to say, where do we want to put our money right now? Because I need the longevity there to make sure that we do the right thing for our shareholders and our bondholders.
Got it.
And look, I mean,
sorry, go.
was going to say, from our perspective, we still continue to have access to capital. I mean, and maybe it goes back to our roots. I mean, we were always, our focus has always been and continues to be around green. I mean, we like to say we're kind of, as renewable developers, going back to our roots. I mean, we're kind of green when it was hip to be green. So to some extent, we're kind of down the right path of where the market is heading. And I mean, look, we've got great access to capital, but we've issued 2 series of green bonds, both on our regulated and renewable sides of our businesses. We just did our first mandatory convertible equity unit, and we actually were the first ones to ever actually stamp those as green as well. So that's a really first for the market. As of yet, I agree with Todd. I mean, the conversations with a lot of investors are focused around ESG and increasingly so. But the only thing I would kind of maybe leave out there and kind of the thought to leave is, look, if you want to decarbonize the world, you got to be able to support the companies that are going to do it. Right, and I'll give you an example of that. I mean, back in 2017, when we bought our Empire District Electric Company, they had a coal plant. They had a coal plant, and they had a 200-megawatt coal plant. And our thesis for buying this company was, look, we can take this coal plant, and we'll be able to shut it down and replace it with renewable generation, 600 megawatts of renewable generation, and we'll reduce greenhouse emissions, and we'll basically save our customers money. And I mean, we went with that thesis and obviously arranging financing. And, I think a lot of investors bought into that, saying like, look, there is, and we got a lot of questions around, look, you're putting coal into your fleet here, but a lot of investors bought into that thesis. Now, have they not done so? Right? It would have been more difficult for us to obviously do what we said we're going to do. And by the way, we actually did shut down a 200 megawatt coal plant earlier this year, and we did deploy 600 megawatts of generation this year. So if investors took a very short-sighted view, that might have not been the case. So I'll maybe leave it with that thought.
It's interesting. It's almost like a question of building up trust. Sorry, go on, Andrée-Lise.
But I think ESG, it's clearly the new route for many investors, especially for big pension funds. It's clear, and I think the mandate, it's really clear for many of them. But now I think the real challenge and how we will make this transition, for me, it's not energy transition, it's economical transition, and we need to do that with people. Because the transition is not just for technology or for big players, it's clearly for people who's working for different group in our world. And the other thing, I think we need to change totally our view. If I take an example, if you have a Tesla powered by coal, it's not the same Tesla you have powered by hydroelectricity, solar, or wind. And if you have aluminum powered by coal from Russia, it's not the same aluminum produced by solar or hydroelectricity based in Quebec. And my point of view, it's we need to become more sophisticated. We need to be more patient, because it's not because we have the vision we can execute properly. And I think the vision, all the screens around the planet, the Facebook, the LinkedIn are full of vision. Now it's time for execution. And for that, we need to have strong people, backbone, who know the industry. It can make this transformation. And I think the principal challenge will be the execution. We're no longer in conversation about the vision. And the ESG will bring sort of discipline in terms of financing, and I think it's good. But it's not perfect yet. It's already a big conversation. What will be our extra financial criteria? How we will measure that? Do we need data to make sure we are doing the right thing? It is impact washing. I don't know, but it's a big topic now.
And so do you think there's a danger, I mean, to both the point you made and the point that Arthur was making, that there's a danger that the perfect can become the enemy of the good here, in terms of...
It's already is, in my point of view, because the perfect did never take in account the execution. And execution in this field, it's engineer, it's business people, it's science, takes time. And if you are impassioned, will not happen.
Got it. So we've got about 5 minutes left. I feel like we could go on for a long time on some of these topics if we really dived into them. There's two things that I wanted to get out of everyone, though, before we go. Could you, sort of based on your experiences in this area, in decarbonizing the grid, or even decarbonization more broadly, I don't want to limit you, what is sort of, if you could give people one lesson that you've learned so far that you haven't said already on this call. So one lesson you've learned so far, and then one thing that if you could just change one thing to help us with this execution, with us achieving the potential that we see in front of us, what would be that one thing you would change? So who wants to go first? One lesson and one thing that you would change. Todd, you've volunteered.
Yeah, look. One lesson that I think the company has learned well is that you need to work sort of across with the government entities that are involved in the decarbonization transition, whether that's federal, provincial, or state, and even the local utility and ISO. And what you need to do is make sure that there's a common education understanding of power grids and power supply, how reliability works, and so that relationship, that ongoing education. The electricity, it sounds simple when you talk about wind farms and other things, but the actual operation on a second-by-second basis is incredibly complex of the interrelationships and flows and the regulatory parties involved in making all of that happen. So I think a common understanding and just good education across the board, and then actually having a common understanding of like, how are we going to get from here to where we want to be in the future in a responsible way, both from an economic point of view and from an environmental point of view. So that's one thing that I think we've learned well, and something we really tried to focus on. As far as one thing I would change in the industry, or one thing I would change. Look, I think renewables energy has come to a point where government subsidies for what I would call the more conventional technologies aren't actually required. Wind, solar is economic. I think, one of my views is in the U.S. there's great incentives for renewables build out. It does require often, tax equity partners to make some of that build out. I think it creates undue, complexity in those transactions to make them, economic. And so if there's anything that can be done to simplify how those subsidies are actually applied to project, I think that would be a great outcome from our point of view.
Well, in the latest budget reconciliation, you may be getting some good news on that front if the legislation goes through as it was in the form I last saw it. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, I'll maybe just pick up a little bit on that theme, because it's kind of along the same lines. I mean, like, for sure, grid decarbonization is going to take significant investment, right? And whatever makes that investment more viable is important. I mean, and I'll maybe take the lens more from the regulated side of the house, and being able to really pass on the decarbonization and pass on those savings to customers. I mean, certainly, having regulators on side and having a stable regulatory regimes to be able to get fair returns for owners. I mean, as I think about and on Todd's topic around PTC, ITC, I agree with that. I mean, there's probably certain forms of generation that could stand on its own right now. But the subsidies also do help, and they do help spur investment. And I wholeheartedly agree. It would be great to make it simpler versus the structures that are there right now. But I mean, I would also take those the PTCs, ITCs, some of the more emergent technologies. I think probably could benefit from that support, whether it be from battery technology and so forth. And as you're alluding, I mean, some of that is actually in the budget reconciliation bill right now.
Got it.
In my point of view, rapidly, don't underestimate the complexity of upscale. And I will say what will change is have more people, big corporation around funds like us, because we have innovations in our hands and we need them to scale up properly.